Hi, everyone. This is Arry, chair of the U.S. Blockchain Coalition and your host for Windshield Time podcast and also the Blockchain Underground. We have these AMAs, Ask Me Anythings, every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Today, we had our guest, Jeff Gaus, super amazing mentor and friend and colleague for me. I really hope you enjoy this AMA as much as I do. He talked all about supply chain blockchain and distributed versus decentralized. He dropped the word serendipity quite a bit, so learn about his word and his life around the word serendipity, which is kind of crazy, all the great things that have happened in his life serendipitously. We talk about data, property, ownership rights, food trust with Walmart, his experience with the Oregon Venture Studio, just so much. So don't forget to join us every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to ping me. And don't forget, we teach these blockchain, Bitcoin, and crypto fundamental classes. You can sign up using our crypto QR code here. And I hope you'll join us. Thank you. Bye. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this week's AMA. This week we have a speaker. His name is Jeff Gaus, and he's the head and founder of the Provenance chain network. He serves on a whole handful of different kind of boards, including several with me, and I find him to be super informational, and I learn from him all the time whenever I get to interface with him. So really excited to have you, Jeff, spend an hour with us to answer questions from me and the community. Welcome, Jeff. Jeff, do you want to give yourself, give yourself a few minutes and give a long form introduction of yourself? How did you get into the space? What's your background? What are you working on? All that.
Well, thanks, Arry. First off, it's been a pleasure getting to know and work with you on all these different boards and the activities that we're working on. And for anybody who's watching this podcast, stay tuned to Arry and me because we got some pretty amazing things coming over the next year. So my name is Jeff Gaus. I live in Portland, Oregon. I am first and foremost a husband of 28 years and a father of 2 adult sons. And my why in life is I'm going to leave the world a better place because I was here. And I execute that across 3 vectors. One is my family. Second is the community service I do, which is all focused on youth education. And right now I'm in the midst of standing up an organization that's going to teach capitalism to high school students. It's a very rewarding function. Love it. And the third is that my third passion I have is economic development. So I am a capitalist, and you will find me usually building people, products, companies, and communities. And to answer the question about how I got here, my background is I did undergraduate work in business administration, marketing, and through the after-school work that I was doing in the university, I talked my way into the telecommunications career that lasted close to 30 years. Where I worked for, I was part of the movement that broke up the phone company. So first it was the digitization of it, and then it was the deregulation of it. And then I got involved very early on when computer telephony integration came on the scene in the late 80s and wrote a business plan on how to take that and apply it to the United States healthcare industry. So I ended up running North America for NEC for the healthcare education and government sectors. So I did a lot of design on healthcare telecom. And through that, I ended up getting involved and started playing with internet telephony, or what we now know as VoIP, in 1994. So it was very, very early. And then I ended up joining a VoIP company in the late 90s and sold that company twice. And then I joined a very, very small startup, pre-revenue, that was in the video space. And so we created a whole category of software that is now known as sales enablement software. And in 2017, I stepped down from that, having been in the CEO's role for, I think, 14 years. And I went on a walkabout, and I made my walkabout my job to get up every morning and visit 3 to 5 people whom I didn't know with one intention, and that was to ask them the question, what can I do to help you? And it was the very first conversation I had, and the individual from Oregon Health Sciences University asked me a question, which was, do you think that you can build a healthcare information technology incubator here in Portland? And I said, I don't know. So I went off and studied that for a while and concluded, I started in March and I concluded in September that the real use case was to build out a blockchain incubator in the state of Oregon. And so in 2018, we got approval from the state of Oregon. It was the governor of the state of Oregon and our Commerce Department, which is known as Business Oregon, were the founding investors in the Oregon Enterprise Blockchain Venture Studio. And it was a very first of its kind in the world, public-private partnership focused on creating a center of excellence for blockchain technology applications, business models, companies, and legal frameworks. And so we got started on that. And in the middle of that conversation, a very large footwear apparel manufacturer here in Oregon approached me and said, "Hey, we want to show you something we're doing. What would you do with it?" And that simple question gave me pause. And about 8 weeks later, I went back to him and said, "Well, what I would do with this is I'd go build the Swift network for inventory."
Oh.
That's what gave rise to the PCN and that, the Provenance chain network. And so the Provenance chain network exists for two reasons. I mean, a very high level fundamental reason is that people have the right to know the facts about the products they buy, consume, and use. And the PCN is focusing that mission statement or that purpose statement. We focus it on two use cases: national security and consumer protection. And so we build out a universal network that will support the provenance gathering and reporting to any interested party of every product on the planet. And what we're working on right now is we have been chosen by the United States Space Force to build that out for the National Security Space Launch Directorate. So that says all the rockets that launch spy satellites, they run down, they have a process called parts pedigree, which is they run down the provenance of every single component in the launch vehicle. And it's a very, you can imagine that's, tens of thousands of parts, and that's, lots and lots of manufacturers that you have to gather data from. And so we're in the middle of that, and we also are executing in the food and beverage space across consumer products. And it's using the exact same code base that we set out to design a universal network that will serve any product, and that's what we are proving through the Space Force and the consumer use cases that we're working on. So that's the for-profit entity. And a couple of weeks ago, we launched the Center for Supply Chain Transparency, Analytics, and Resiliency, known as the C-STAR, at Portland State University. And that is to be a nonprofit educational and standards body to define how we are going to communicate with each other in commercial transactions. So that's what I'm up to primarily. I spend, like I said, I'll spend most of my time working on building people, products, companies, and communities. And, that's where, 85% of my work week and actually my mental space goes through. So back to you, Arry.
I'm going, whoa, wow, whoa. It's a crazy journey you went on there. It's just do you think a lot of your just experience and success has been asking the right question to the right person at the right time? Or what do you think it is that creates these opportunities for you versus someone who might have been given the same question?
Well, some of that comes from, my psychological profile. If you've ever seen Strengths Finders analysis, I'm a stimulator, a maximizer, an ideator, a strategist of the futurist. In that order, and that combination says there's 1 out of 34 million people. So there's not a whole lot of people that think the way I do, which means, it's both good and bad, but it means I'm often misunderstood. But the thing I attribute more of it to is that I am a huge believer in serendipity. If you focus, and we actually have serendipity written down as our third value that we operate by as a company, the Provenance Chain Network. And what we say about that is that we're going to lift our heads up and look around and identify opportunities when they present themselves. And if you think about luck or anything like that, it's always preparation meets opportunity. And so I think serendipity comes from being prepared by having clearly defined purposes, missions, visions, and it's actually magical. We joke within the company that the company is actually misnamed, and we think it should be called the Providence Chain Network, because we no sooner say that we need to go do this and the vector and or the people to execute on that show up the next day. It's amazing how it works. So.
I'm gonna have to go hang out in your world for like a day or a week and just like watch serendipity happen. Sounds really cool. I have a question. When you were going through your history, you said you were asked about how you would set up a healthcare incubator, and then that was in like May or something, and then in September you came back and you said it should be a blockchain incubator. Why did you go from healthcare to blockchain? Like, what was your thinking process on that?
Well, the thinking process on that was as I really crawled down the rabbit hole of blockchain, one of the things I came to the conclusion of is that this is one of those monumental technologies that comes along in human evolution. You know, if you think about it, it was fire, the wheel, you know, the telegraph, you know, railroads, all those kind of things. And the last big, like, game-changing technology that came out was in 1993. Most everybody says, "Oh, the internet." Well, no, the internet was around in the late 70s. What happened in 1993 was HTML.
HTML.
You know, it's coding language, but that changed everything. When you think about all the businesses that got disrupted were created because of that technology. And as I went down that rabbit hole, I was, okay, well, this is one of those game-changing technologies. What's the biggest thing that it could change? And if you look at it from a GDP perspective, the largest industry in the world is the healthcare industry. And it's also America's biggest drag on our economy. And so I combined the two because I had a long background in serving the healthcare industry. And so I convinced the state of Oregon that what we should do for this blockchain project was to focus all of our attention on one thing, which is how do we use blockchain to bend the cost curve of healthcare? And so with that in mind, we went out and said, okay, well, we've got to focus on identity and identity management for medical records, incentives to change human behavior from that tragic intervention to wellness management. And there was one other, and then ultimately in the payment environment. So when we went out and solicited companies, we solicited those things, brought them to the state of Oregon and incubated them. One of which, the most glorious example of two that we incubated was, number one was the Brave browser, if you're familiar with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was incubated here at our
blockchain. Really? Oh, wow. Brave browser by Brendan Ike.
Yeah. And then the other one was a company out of San Francisco called Chronicle. And what Chronicle is doing is is mapping out, and they support this thing called Beta Ledger, which is to manage the provenance of pharmaceutical products, so they're very highly regulated. And so that was another organization that came here. I had nothing to do with selecting them, and they had nothing to do with us concluding why we should go build the PCN. So that's what the Blockchain Venture Studio went off and did, and that was how I tied together that question of can you build a healthcare incubator, and blockchain was by bridging those two worlds.
Oh wow, very interesting. And then we're here to talk about supply chain and blockchain, but before that, usually when I talk about the definition of blockchain, I stress that one of the most important characteristics of blockchain is decentralization, and also the fact that it's public and permissionless. Often when we're talking about supply chains, though, we're usually talking about more private blockchains or distributed ledger technology specifically. How do you parse out those definitions in your head?
Well, I view blockchain as a technology. And first off, I'm not one of those subscribers to the blockchain, because that's not me. There are many blockchains, and it's a technology. But we chose through what you wouldn't know unless you sat next to us is that when we started the company, we made a couple of very declarative statements to our investors. Number one was be prepared for us to vaporize your money. We were fully transparent about that it was a high risk venture, and most startups fail. So if you're going to invest in this, you got to be prepared that we're going to vaporize your money. Second thing we said to him was, we are not going to be a lean startup company. We do not believe that that's the methodology that needs to be done here. And so the third thing we said is we're going to take 1 year and do nothing but research on what we need to build, for whom, what are the best technology stacks, et cetera. And we will write a white paper at the end of that year that will be the definition of a minimum viable environment because of this decentralization. And so we made a bunch of conclusions there, which one was, okay, it's not going to be a public blockchain, it's going to be a private distributed ledger. We are going to use proof of authority as our algorithm. So everybody that's on the network is a known player. And it's not going to be completely decentralized, it will be distributed. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And then we chose Hyperledger Fabric, and without getting into, and no offense intended to anybody, but without getting into propeller-headed discussions about its technical merits or not, we chose it based on business reasons, which included, first and foremost, it's got one of the largest development populations around the world, and it is an industrial or enterprise class blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology. And thirdly, it's the only blockchain technology that the federal government has awarded an authority to operate certificate, which are required to operate in sensitive environments like DoD. So those are the reasons that we chose that particular development stack. So
Awesome.
probably more information than you wanted, but that's the background.
So it seems like you made the decision very intentionally aware, but you're not so stuck, because there are propeller heads and those that are more like AKA purists that do get stuck on the definitions and the naming conventions.
Yep. So do we, because we do not describe ourselves as a blockchain company.
What do you describe yourself as?
We're a trust and transparency company.
Trust and transparency company. And that's focused on the supply chains of food and beverage product, Air Force parts, stuff like that.
The spaces that we operate in are space and defense. Well, so it's two categories, industrial and consumer. So the industrial category is space and defense, commercial aerospace, semiconductors. And on the consumer side, we're focused on food and beverage, footwear and apparel, and regulated intoxicants, let's put it that way. So you can think about it as wine, beer, alcohol, cannabis, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. The sin industry.
Yeah, and the reason we chose some of those is specifically food and beverage, which is where we started, was that the food and beverage industry has the most complex data set requirements for supply chain management and tracking, especially where we're headed. So we decided to let's do the hardest thing first. And that's because of that, that's why this Air Force Research Labs and then ultimately the Space Force came to us, because they wanted a dual use technology. They said, can you take that and apply it over here? And the answer was, yeah, absolutely. So that's how we do it.
Can you give us more insights on what makes the food and bev so difficult?
Well, it's so let me tell you what the end game is. That there's this new guy that heads up the FDA. He's number 2 at the FDA, Office of Food Safety. His name is Frank Giannis, and Frank Giannis comes from Walmart. He was Walmart's head of supply chain.
Wow.
And I'll give you 2 words: romaine lettuce. And if you think about it, if you can't isolate the provenance of a romaine lettuce during a bio outbreak, you have to recall all of it. And so what Frank Giannis is pushing for is that it's through 2 things. One is Food Safety Modernization Act, which was a set of regulations that came on stream on January 1st, 2022. They started enforcing them January 1st, 2023. The other thing is this thing called the New Era of Smarter Food Safety, which is a whole movement that the FDA is pushing, where their long-term objective is, they would prefer to be really short-term, is that for any product that is consumed by a human being, That the FDA has the ability to hit a button in 30 seconds and recall all of the stuff that needs to be recalled, including stopping a scanner transaction at a point of sale time.
What? That's
Yeah,
not possible now, but that's gonna be possible in the future?
it'll be possible within a year to two.
Wow.
So we mapped all that out. And so if you think about it, so to answer your question, if you think about that, you have to be able to isolate the row in the field where the lettuce came from to be able to know which lot and batch number you're going to recall. And there's all kinds of movements taking place, not least of which is, if you're familiar with the GS1 organization, which they control the QR codes and the barcodes on products. In 2023, they go to a 2D barcode, which will serialize products. And so it's not just a can of Goya beans, it's this particular can of Goya beans.
Oh, wow.
Now, that would be at the retail environment, but you have to know where those beans came from, who handled it, what temperatures the products have been stored at, expiration dates, et cetera, et cetera. And to be able to do that, you have to gather data the whole way down the supply chain. It's what's known as N-tier visibility. And why we think this is such a huge opportunity, and I've bet the rest of my career on it, is that where was I going with this? This is every product on the planet is headed this direction. I mean, the executive order on semiconductors is saying we got to know where all this stuff is coming from, et cetera, et cetera. And so you got to be able to capture. Oh, where I was headed with this is McKinsey and Company in January of this year published an article on supply chain because of what we've just been through over the last 2 years.
Right.
What they found out through their studies was that 97%, listen to this statistic, 97% of the companies on this planet have zero visibility to their supply chain beyond their tier one suppliers.
Wow.
Now, some people do that for plausible deniability reasons.
Yeah.
But most don't have it because it's kind of hard to do.
It is hard to do.
It's hard to do doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
True.
So we decided to tackle a really big problem that was kind of gnarly and said, we're going to go do this.
Man, if we're going to be serializing like cans of beans and products like that, then I'm just imagining like the exponential growth of the amount of data that companies are going to have to house and store and maintain for how many years? 7 years, 5 years, 10 years? What is that? Like, it's just not even like, do we even have the technology to house that kind of consumer level data?
Yeah, we do actually.
We do.
We do. And so the approach that we took, and put a disclaimer out there, and we've filed 10 patents on our architecture and our design and how we function. So what we did in this 1 year study, we asked two questions, which was, one, how do we make this universal across all industries?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, what is the atomic particle within the supply chain that you can digitize? And the atomic particle is a purchase order, sales order transaction, because that exists from conscious Kim in the retail environment all the way back to the person who's buying the produce from the farmer.
That's true.
The exact same recursive transaction the whole way through. And that is the source of the transaction data that then starts to feed this database, which is distributed. And the second thing was, okay, well, then we define a universal data container, one data container, and then we apply it to different things. And so the big breakthrough that we made in comparison with other track and trace capabilities is it's not just about the product. Because if you think about anything that is a manufactured product or an agricultural product, you have people who show up at a place to transform products into other products. And so our universal data container is applied to people, places, and products. As those three digital containers or digital twins interact with each other, they create transactions. Transactions and interactions. And so if you go back to the comment about the Swift network for inventory,
Yeah.
the Swift network says a couple things. One is it's member owned, and it's also a transaction oriented network. And that's exactly what we've designed.
Oh,
Now, your question about the data,
yeah.
the beauty about what we're doing is we're riding two laws. One is Moore's law, and the other is Metcalfe's law. And so this network becomes more valuable by each member that it attaches themselves to the network. And Moore's law is that, this comes from my experience within the telecommunications law. I mean, I remember when it used to cost like $1.50 a minute call from New York to LA. Now I can do a video call between here and London on demand for free.
Yeah.
That's the law of the telecosm. That's George Gilder's law. And what we believe is with all these 5G satellites coming on, we've designed for an always on and available 5G environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there, cloud gives you basically free storage.
Interesting.
And so these transactions are going to become very, very cost effective to be able to gather the data. If you insert yourself into the workflow in the most common denominator environment.
Interesting.
This is the most common denominator in the computation.
That's true. That's true. Hey, side note, George Gilder, he hosts a conference every year, November 10th through 11. It's here in Bellevue, Washington. If you're interested, I can connect you up.
Please do.
If you're a fanboy, he's right here.
Yeah, all of his books have influenced me in a big way. The most recent one was, he did Life After Television, the Law of the Microcosm, the Law of the Telecosm.
Yeah.
And then his latest book is Life Beyond Google.
Ooh.
And it happens to be all about blockchain.
What? Are you kidding me? So he's hosting a conference this year, November 10th through 11, and there is a whole section on blockchain. Yeah. I'll hook you up with the organizer and see what we can do there. I'll open it up to the community for questions, supply chain questions, Jeff Gaus questions, the meaning of humanity questions. Feel free to raise your hands or type it into the chat.
I mean, I think if there's only this number of people, we can go open, hit the mic and start talking. Right?
That's true too. Like, don't be shy. And everyone, I think most of us know each other here in this call. We should be, mostly very familiar with each other.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not shy.
Okay.
Hey. So Jeff, it just kind of occurred to me, the beans themselves, like I just kind of fixated on the can of beans, right? Or these different, the beans themselves aren't going to be coded and tracked. The containers will. So isn't there a pretty massive opportunity for tracking post-consumer goods, like going through recycling? Like if you're talking about cans or you're talking about plastic, wouldn't there be some opportunity there to have some accountability, get some data about what is recycled and how that's handled?
So there's two questions in there. The first one is about the serialization of the beans, and the answer is yes, they will be serialized. They will be serialized batch, and that's why we did this, started in the food and beverage industry. And what we are able to do is we are able to attach a digital twin to a cluster of grapes from a specific row and follow that the whole way through. Now, what we won't be able to say is these specific beans are in here, but what we can say is this can of beans has beans from these different batches that came from these different locations. And so you can give let's say that we know one field, we can tell all of the products, the serialized cans that have beans from that field. So you can isolate.
Wow.
The second part of your question was the post-consumer. That's really where we started, because when we were shown what was happening in the footwear and apparel industry, retail, they came to us with we'd like to know how to use this connected product post the retail transaction to stay in touch with the consumer. And so we went down this path. So we immediately defined this persona. We call her conscious kin. And let me describe her for you. So Conscious Kim is in her late 20s, early 30s. She's educated by global standards. She's affluent and she cares. She cares about what goes in her body. She cares about what goes on her body. She cares about what she puts in her family's bodies. And she cares how her decisions impact people on the planet and the planet itself. She wants to know. And so we use that news to say, okay, well, what are the things that Conscious Kim is going to be interested in the retail environment? And as it turns out, wheat or cotton, carbon footprint, water impact, all that other good stuff. And then we're like, well, God, we got to go get all kinds of information from the supply chain to be able to know that. And one of the organizations that we teamed up with, happens to be the Consumer Brands Association out on the East Coast, represents product manufacturers. They have a couple pillars to their long-term strategy, and one of them is smarter packaging, sustainable packaging. The other one is circularity. And so that same label that discloses where something came from and who made it can also be used to instruct the consumer how to deal with this particular product at end of life. Because we all see that symbol and do you know what it means? I don't, and so when you see the triangle with a 6 in it, you can be instructed, well, this has components 6 and 5, and here's where you get rid of that. So yes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the consumer products industry is interested in is understanding Conscious Kim's behavior in a super center. And so that would be okay, what products did she evaluate before she chose the product that she chose? That's wildly valuable information. Now, where we happen to have a what I call a governance goddess who works for us. And she comes out of a blockchain research environment. And she also comes from the self-sovereign identity and data privacy world. And so I'm going to make some pretty strong statements about how PCN thinks about this. First off, we don't believe in data privacy. We believe in data property ownership rights. There's a very big difference there. And so our stated position on this is we believe in data property ownership rights. He or she who creates the data owns the data. That data is not shared with anybody without expressed, intentional, situational consent in exchange for consideration. So that puts it into tort law, not privacy law, puts it into tort law. There's all kinds of rules about that. And the data exchange of Kim evaluating a number of products before she makes her consumption decision is her property. Now, she may choose to share that with a brand in exchange for some kind of consideration, coupon, incentive, advanced look at new products, those kinds of things. But it's done with her permission and her consent. And that flows the entire way through the supply chain. Now, what we also realized was that there is an interesting thing about this atomic particle, two-sided transaction. Any commercial transaction is a two-sided transaction, right? Au contraire, every commercial transaction on the planet has at least one third-party observer. And in many, many cases, there are more observers than there are participants, especially when you're dealing with regulated products. And so that same series of data gathering can also be used to do data presentation in a digital disclosure environment to comply with laws, regulations, certification bodies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great, Jeff. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. It was a very insightful question.
Well, anybody who's seen The Good Place knows that okay, somebody here probably has, but their whole point was that life is so complicated now. You never know even if you want to buy an apple to be healthier, that apple might have come off a farm that has terrible practices, treats their employees badly, does all these different things. And so in the intent of doing something good, you end up doing something not good. And so getting data on everything for the entire life cycle of retail products and things like that, it feels like that would be a way to, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Guilt maybe companies guilt companies into doing something better if it's more transparent, right? Suddenly they're not doing anything quietly in the shadows. They've got eyes on them and straighten up and fly right? More responsible.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because that's exactly the case. We actually talk about this in our values, that we're very explicit about this, that we are a force for good in the world. And believe that this transparency will then guilt or cause people through competitive disadvantage to change their behavior. So for example, one of our customers who happens to be in the wine business, this was his exact quote. I'm not so sure consumers are ready or want to know what I'm legally allowed to do to wine before I put it in a bottle.
What?
That's
What does that
rough.
mean? What does that mean? What's happening?
What that means is that in the production process of wine, a wine producer is allowed to do a lot of things legally.
Like?
Using certain chemicals to precipitate stuff out of the wine and all kinds of things, and still be certified biodynamic and all those other things. But he went on to conclude the statement with, however, if I'm doing something that I'm not willing to talk about with the consumer, maybe I shouldn't be doing it. And so right there is proof that the PCN mission can change the world.
Yeah.
And the best advertisement for what we're up to.
You have a choice to at least know to drink that wine or not, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. There's a lot of background noise.
I apologize, I'm on a subway. So I was saying, well, at the very least, you should have a choice to drink it or not if you know what's in it.
Right.
Yep. I actually saw a video recently of this feed that people are allowed to feed plastics to pigs, like take recycled plastic materials and then refine them into tiny little bits, and they put it into the pig feed, and the pigs digest this. And of course we eat pigs, right? Like through pork and ribs and all sorts of pork products that we eat. And so if you don't know that, you're like, you think you're eating meat, but you may not be eating just meat at the end of the day.
Yep.
Yeah, very disturbing.
PCN is we don't see
Well,
if anybody practices, or we don't say good or bad.
Yeah.
What we say is, here's the claim that they've made, and here's the evidence to support the claim, and here's the veracity of that evidence. Consumer or the customer can judge. We don't judge.
It might be amplifying that Justice Brandeis quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant, literally.
Yes. Yep.
Or, the Upton Sinclair's book, right? Just bringing transparency to the whole entire industrial process might actually be a good thing, hopefully. So how quickly is this PCN network going to be everywhere?
Depends on commercial success. And clearly, it's, so I would love to tell you that this was the strategy to go to the satellites to come down from the sky, but that's what's happening. And so because of the convening power of the Department of Defense, they have the ability to make it a requirement that this is, how we're going to do these pedigree reviews in the future, which says then, they're not saying that you have to use the PCN. But what they are saying, like the IRS does, is here's the way you're going to deliver information to us. This is the form it needs to be in, this is the structure of it, etc.
There's a Brooke question. His question is, what aspects of blockchain technology led you to choose this over a centralized databases? What trade-offs do you see?
Well, trade-offs. So first up, the centralized database requires one person to hold that database, and it also requires all kinds of security gates and things like that to protect the data. And a centralized database is not designed to share data. And so this is where blockchain technology is really good, is that everybody can have their own copy of the data by running their own node if they so choose. And it is also designed for much better security. And one of the trade-offs is speed of transactions. But because we're not doing proof of work it's not a 10-minute transaction, it's sub-second. But, and you have to get somebody who's a lot smarter than me to take you through the transaction details on that. But what we've done is we've identified 7 categories of transactions, request for information, a submission of data, blah, blah, blah. There's 7 different transactions that we support that will tell you everything you need to know about where a product came from. And the best way to think about this, how we got there, is we were asked to deal with this box of shoes in a retail environment. And when you think about it, you got a box, in this case it was orange and a QR code on it. I told you there was a pair of, shoes, size 11, men's. But when you open up that box, you immediately now have the boxes of product. The left shoe is a product, the right shoe is a product, and then you have the laces and the eyelets and the insole and the outer sole. All of those are individual products. And so when you're looking at that barcode on the outside, you're actually looking at a summary of a whole series of data. It is Russian nesting doll strategy. It's probably a wrong term to use these days, but that's the visual concept that we have thought of, is that we have all of that. And then we mapped it to, there's all kinds of stages of that, which is the origin, the custody, conversion, and the consumption and the conversion of the product. So where did it come from? Who's held title to this? Both physical title, or title, and logical title and physical title. Those are 2 different things. And then the consumption, who's buying it? What did they do with it afterwards? So Themba has a question, which is, what are the benefits of software business going into blockchain? Is the question an existing software company converting to blockchain, or somebody starting blockchain from scratch?
An existing one.
Well, that's one of those that you're asking the next phase of the evolution of software from enterprise premises deployed to cloud, and the next version is, okay, well, do we put this on a blockchain? First off, as much of a zealot I am about distributed ledger and blockchain technology, I'm also very pragmatic in it is not the solution for every use case. And so the company is thinking about that needs to first start with, okay, what are we trying to do? Who are we going to serve? And what's the value proposition that we're going to offer to them? And then determine which technology is the best to use. And that's the way we approach it. We approach this from the question that I asked myself when I was designing the company was, okay, well, what if you were the guy who figured out how to have total visibility to all inventory transactions on planet Earth? What would that look like? And that's when I came up with that would look like the Swift network for inventory. And then I was like, okay, well, how the hell do I build that? And literally the next day, the guy who had built the Footwear Apparel supply chain for the orange box guys in Oregon showed up in my life.
What?
The currency guy. And so I said this statement, I want to build the Swift network for inventory, because I get it and I know how to build that. So there we go.
Crazy.
That's the example. That's an example of the serendipity.
Is that Dan?
Yeah, that's Dan.
Oh, wow. Crazy. More questions, you guys? Or Gal?
So I want to apologize. Did not hear your presentation, but I'm curious what's the difference between what you did and Walmart's blockchain, the usage for the oil that they produce, because they can trace it to every tree that they grow, apparently every olive.
The big difference, they're built on Hyperledger Fabric, and what you're talking about specifically is the food trust. And if you look into the food trust, you will find that it has not taken hold. And we're very familiar with that. And it was one of the use cases that we studied before we wrote our code. The difference between what they do and what we do is very, very simple. They only focus on the product. And most of the supply chain track and trace capabilities only focus on the product, where we have figured out that it's the people, the places, and the product They all have to interact together to have a true provenance of what's going on. That's number one. Number two, their pricing model is very oppressive. They haven't been able to get the small farmer to adopt it. And that's why Frank Giannis is taking the approach that he's taking, because he wants a low cost, no cost solution. And so that, I mean, that's the big difference is adoption. And, you know, the other thing that is interesting about it is one of the things we hypothesized was, and we used a frame of reference of the USB standard. Everybody knows the USB standard, it's product, right? So that's how you plug your mice in and all those devices, et cetera, universal serial bus. That was invented by Intel. It had been in Intel labs for quite a while, and they were trying to get the PC OEM market to adopt it. And the PC OEM market told them, it's a good idea, it's a great idea, but we're not going to give it to you. We won't tie into that because it's going to give Intel a competitive advantage. So the USB standard had to be spun out to the equivalent of a foundation. And then other people joined in on that. And that's what Walmart has been learning painfully, is that the people in the industry aren't going to participate because they don't want Walmart having visibility to what their supply chains are. And that's a very common and recurring theme. So the PCN is set up to be that independent third-party organization that is majority owned by the facets of the industry. So our white paper includes this concept of Consortium Ownership, and that the PCN will maintain a minority position in the business unit entity that serves a specific industry. And that entity is usually going to be a nonprofit trade association that is offering this as a service to their members. That's the approach that we take. And that comes from, you know, there's a company here in Oregon called Smith and Crown, which is the world's most renowned blockchain analyst research firm. And their senior fellow, the person who architected their analysis framework, is one of my co-founders. And she worked very hard to define a way that found the white space by having looked at the Smith and Crown has analyzed something like 2,500 blockchain projects around the planet. We had the wisdom of that analysis to say, do this, don't do that. And here's how we should architect this from a governance perspective to make sure that it plays. Now, the other thing that, you know, I would say Walmart slash Food Trust did wrong was that they were going after it on a case-by-case basis, where blockchain is always successful. And kind of back to Brooke's question, why blockchain? Blockchain is a team sport, and this is one of those things that there's got to be a huge amount of collaboration and support, and you can't do that one company at a time. You got to do it through conveners. So either a purchasing consortium and or the trade associations that are representing all interests equally. And so that's the approach that we took. Is there another question in the chat that we can see? Yeah, okay, oh no, it's please.
Yeah, blockchain is a team sport is a good quote. You want to use this technology when you have a very complicated process with a lot of coordinating and a lot of people interacting in a very complicated process.
A lot of people needing to see the same kind of information or elements of the same kind of information.
Right.
You know, so that's why the permission environment, not everybody gets to see the same data.
Right. Where did you get the proof of authority from? From where does Hyperledger naturally have that in there as a protocol, or?
I think so. I mean, I think you have to talk to Dan about that because he's the guy that architected the strategy. But part of it was, you know, his analysis of the different consensus mechanisms and speed and all of those things, and he concluded that because of the kind of data that's going to be on the network, it needs to be a private permissioned environment. And so then that leads to, okay, well, if you're there, then that says proof of authority, which is who's allowed to be in here and who's allowed to have the data.
Yeah. does it get complicated in organizations and roles and humans? Because humans are not in roles forever, and roles are not necessarily forever too. Like you could be chief supply chain person for this organization, and then they might remove the job role, or they might remove Joe from that role, or how do you deal with those sorts of scenarios?
So one of the other things that we concluded very early on in our research, well, this was actually my conclusion prior to creating the PCN and the venture studio. One of the things that I realized very early on is that blockchain is and will only be successful based on having an identity standard.
Yep. Ding.
And that led to that whole healthcare ID discussion that you and I've had, Arry, right? Drive this conversation down that path. And because there isn't an ID standard, what the PCN chose to do is that we surrender identity management to an external application. So we use a federated identity management model.
Oh.
In the case of an enterprise, they're already doing identity management in their enterprise. Microsoft Active Directory or Okta or
okay, so you surrender it to whatever the going identity management solution is for that particular enterprise or enterprises.
Correct.
Okay.
That way we don't have to manage that.
Okay.
Already doing.
But in the future, if there is a decentralized or distributed one that does come into fruition, like I can't even think of one right now, but if something does come into fruition using DIDs and verifiable credentials or something of that sort, that could be implemented.
Yes, and very easily. And we fully expect that to happen. It's just a question of where it's going to come from and who's going to be managing that. And that's why I brought up the whole Linux Foundation announcement that took place either yesterday or Wednesday morning about open sourcing wallets.
Right, that's huge.
The wallet technology. And we also have this, there was my comment about data property ownership. There's also this concept of multifaceted roles for a human being. So Arry you is Arry you, but you have 4 different personas that I know of, right? Which is chair of the US Blockchain Coalition, chair of the Cascadia Blockchain Council. Those are 2 different roles. You also work for the WTIA and you're a professor at Florida State University. You're also a mom and a consumer.
Right.
So in this particular instance, which identity are you using, or which extension to your identity are you using?
True.
Unlock specific pieces of information that you are permitted to see.
Side question came up in my head. So, like, what about the world of global affairs? Like, are you going to keep this PCN network type of technology limited to the United States government and United States private companies, or do you know of PCN like competitors that are coming out of other countries? That what is the state of affairs on supply chain technology like this?
So there's probably 15 or 20 people that I would consider that could be viewed as competitors to us around the world. There's a lot going on over in Singapore, Hong Kong, China. There's a fair amount going on in Europe specifically, and there's a movement afoot within Germany right now. We do not intend to restrict this only to the United States. Go back to our every inventory transaction on planet Earth. What would you do? And we also plan on riding the 5G satellite constellations. So by definition, that says we intend to be global. Many of our supply chains are, as we learned over the last few years, our supply chains are very complex. And it's almost impossible to have a one country supply chain for the complexity of the products that we build. Either for political trade reasons, like it makes sense for Boeing to have manufacturers in the countries who buy their airplanes, and it just makes logical sense. But there are certain things where the government is saying, either it's got to be produced here, or it's got to be produced in a country that we consider an ally and trust, right? But then there's other products that we don't care. You know, we just like to know where it comes from. You know, I mean, for example, Phoenix Cantor Freedom standing up in the center of the Boston Gardens saying, you know, you can't prove that you don't have Uyghur cotton. Well, I happen to know it's a true statement, but they can't prove that they don't have it. And that effect, I mean, that's now, you know, if they can't prove that you don't have it,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get to import it into the United States.
Right.
And so go back to national security, consumer protection. Those are the two guiding lights that we have.
So many things that we could double click on all the things you said, Jeff, in the last like 55 minutes. But we're out of time today. We could definitely have you back for an update, or if there are other opportunities to bring you in to talk about different things that you're working on. But thank you so much, Jeff, for your time today. Thank you to those that participated today. I learned so much. I've written down like a whole pile of notes that I'm going to go and read up on after this. So thank you so much for that. If people want to get in touch with you or follow you, what's the best way for them to follow what you're doing?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I respond to just about every request that comes in. I'm also findable via email, which is jeff.gaus, Gaus, at theprovenancechain.com. Or reach Arry, and she's got all my contact addresses.
That's true. I'm grabbing your LinkedIn link. I'm going to pop it into the chat here. Copy, paste. Here's his LinkedIn. And Marina asked, did you talk about GoGo? What's GoGo?
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
So no, we did not talk about Marina.
It's not GoGo, it's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. How do you check that the data they're putting in is actually true data?
Well, there's some secret sauce in there in our intellectual property filings, and it has to do with the triangulation between people, places, and products. There's all kinds of geo-time stamping information and things like that. And one of the things that we've learned because of our work with the Space Force is that a location is not just a two-dimensional GPS address. It happens to be a four-dimensional element because there's also elevation and time involved. And so where is a particular piece of data being entered from, by whom, what's the date stamp, and does the GPS location or the three-dimensional location of where that data is said to be entered from, does that match where it actually came from? Because you take it down.
So using Arry's example, if the guy who grows pigs does not put that he put a plastic in, then we would never know, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of legislation coming. I mean, the big one right now, since you use pigs, is California's Proposition 12, which went into effect January 1st of 2022, which specifically states no pork gets sold into the state of California unless they can prove that the pig was humanely raised. There's some very specific definitions about that. And only 15% of the pork that is grown and raised in the United States qualifies for those can prove that data. And there's more and more of that coming. There's the New York Fashion Act, which says if you're a company that produces apparel and you have global sales of $100 million or more, you must reveal to the consumer everything about the supply chain, including the wage scales of the employees along the supply chain.
Wow.
And this stuff is coming really fast.
Actually, good. That's really good. Good to hear. Hopefully no unintended consequences that we haven't thought of.
Well, there are unintended consequences. And there always are in any technology. The question is how we.
Well, like the price of the garments would be doubled, right?
Yeah. I mean, but clothes shouldn't be that cheap anyway. I mean, there's always a cost.
Yes, but you don't want to pay extra cost for just just because they announced what's in it.
Well, yes, but if I'm
But
not
at least you should have a choice, right? If you want to pay double for the disclosed chain of events,
Yeah.
then you pay double. But if I don't want to pay the double for disclosing the chain of events, I should be not obligated to pay the double, right?
or just don't buy it, right?
I mean, that's the nature.
Well, I have to wear something.
Well, no, I understand that. So when we get back to the conscious Kim environment that we talked about, if you are conscious Kim and you're in a supercenter and you're evaluating white t-shirts, and one white t-shirt can show you all the data about the supply chain and its impact on the environment, and it's $14, and you scan another shirt that's $10, you have the choice. You've stated, conscious Kim has stated, this stuff matters to me, but her behavior may not match that statement. She buys the $10 t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
That's very valuable information to the supply chain and to the brand.
Yeah.
But she has the freedom of choice. Nobody's saying she's got to pay double.
Yeah.
The market economics will determine that.
Yes, but the market decides.
Well, once the regulation comes in, they won't be able not to disclose it. And if the disclosure caused significant raises in prices, then you really don't have a choice because everybody has to follow it.
Yep. And that you control through legislative agendas and regulatory and challenging those things. I mean, that's the nature of the free market.
Yep.
Right. But as soon as you have a regulation, you don't have choices anymore. Your choices are taken away, right?
In some cases, I mean, yeah, I mean, an example from my background is E-rate. How many of you know what E-rate is? Came in during the Clinton administration, which is a tax on all telephone numbers in the United States to fund the internet in our schools.
Mm.
Been around for 30 years, something like that. You don't have a choice, you have to pay that. And so that's one of those that, okay, if we want to have transparency and we want to make sure that the stuff that we're consuming as consumers complies with our trade agreements, our food safety regulations, et cetera, then you got to play by these rules. All commercial transactions have rules.
I mean, food is definitely because your health and your well-being depends on it. But the t-shirts, I don't really care who made it and how they made, as long as it's, I can wear it, right?
Well, you don't, maybe, but the United Nations does. And they just issued a report on that. And the United States government cares because of our trade agreements.
All right. Well, I have to cut this off. Thank you so much, Jeff, again, for your time.
Thank you.
Find him on LinkedIn or reach out to him if you have more questions, or let me know if you want to have him on again. I'll definitely bring out Jeff again. Thank you guys, everyone. See you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
All right. Welcome to Windshield Time, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. This podcast is non-technical, fun, informative way to learn about money, Bitcoin, blockchains, crypto, and digital assets for busy parents and working folks who are curious about these new technologies. Day, Arry, and their guests talk about these evolutionary systems of money and what they do, y'all. Because what part of your life does money not touch? This podcast is not financial advice, and your reactions are your total and complete responsibility, y'all. Now, thanks again, and enjoy the show.
Stuck inside.